Thank you for joining us today. I'm Laura Barrett, a PhD student in the iSchool and treasurer of the student chapter of the American Library Association. This is Elizabeth Uchimura, an MSI student in the iSchool, graduating this semester, and the president of the student chapter of the ALA. We are here to interview Dr. Laura Spears, FSU iSchool alum and director of the Assessment and User Experience and associate university librarian with the University of Florida Libraries. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we thought we would start out with a little bit of an icebreaker and ask you about your preferences for paper versus digital when reading.
So, thanks for giving me this opportunity and spending some time with me today. I would say that it depends on what I'm reading. When I'm reading for pleasure, I typically will still go back to paper. But if I'm reading something that is either nonfiction or for work, I like to use digital copies so I can annotate and search and find.
That's great.
Excellent. So can you give us a broad overview of your career path and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. So, in almost every situation that I find myself in, I have been allowed the opportunity and just had a natural inclination to voice my opinion or share my ideas. And having done that, I've often been asked to provide the leadership for, completing projects or things like that. And so um, when I was young, I worked with my grandfather and he taught me a lot about how to do work well. So that's where my work ethic came from. And just based on that, I worked in movie theaters for a long time when I was young because I didn't get my first library job that I applied for. So I went into movie theaters and I just was good at management. I liked working with people. And so when I was 17, I became an assistant manager and just kind of stayed in that career for a while. And I was just given, opportunities to move up. And it was a time where it was a highly male dominated field was movie theater management. And so, I just saw it as an opportunity to really make my way, learn about management, learn about the field. And I was given opportunities because I was, in the right place at the right time where the opportunities were being created for women in that field. And so, I had some really great leadership and mentors in that field. And it was the first time that I had heard something like, "Don't be afraid to be a woman in a position of power." And that really resonated with me because it was from someone who I didn't particularly get along with, but we happened to be in a situation, and toward the end of the event, he and I were talking, and I actually thought he was kind of, chauvinistic, and then as we were leaving, he said, "Hey, I just want to tell you this." And when he told me that, "Don't be afraid to be a woman in a position of power," it carried so much weight because he said it. And it was one of those, just off the cuff. It wasn't a formal evaluation or anything. And so that stayed with me for a long time. And I realized that as leaders, as managers, we're viewed with, a sense of having, a certain amount of power, and having that, the things we say carry weight. And so that's when I recognize, in leadership positions, you really get to have an impact on people. And I really liked that. And so in every case, when decided to go into libraries for a while, I had to kind of sit back and just learn the craft, learn my field. But then when positions came open, I just naturally gravitated to that. And at times I've had to tell myself, when people say they need something done, you could just duck. But not very good at that. And so I went into libraries, and as I was finishing up, I went to the Sunshine State Library Leadership Institute, and Jill Canono was one of my great mentors, and I had to have a mentor from library world. And so Dr. Christy Kuntz agreed to be my mentor. And she was wonderful. And toward the end of it, she said, "Hey, you have a lot of experience in this HR thing. Do you want to teach?" So I said, "Sure." And so I started teaching. And that's when I realized, I'd really like to do my PhD in this. And so I came to FSU and finished my PhD, and I worked with Chuck McClure from the Information Institute. He recently retired. And that was a great experience, and it, continued to feed my desire to be in positions that were interesting like this and used my ability in research, but also librarianship. And so University of Florida had been advertising for an assessment librarian. And at that time, academic libraries, that was the big thing, is get an assessment librarian. They didn't have a program or a position. They didn't really know what they were looking for. And so that can be challenging, but it was an opportunity for me to really kind of establish some things here at the University of Florida. So, I just not ever been afraid to try different things and to be optimistic about, a positive outcome. So that's really how I got to where I am. And I've always been willing and recognized that the person you meet today could be helpful to you later, and can also be hurtful. So you have to really bear that in mind. Life can be long, and those relationships that you have that you're good with can benefit you, and the ones that you don't take as much care with can really be hurtful, not just to you, but to others. And no one wants that. And so it's important to recognize that everyone around you has the potential to be either an asset in your life, or or can prevent you from being able to access assets that you need to get things done.
Yeah. So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but could you expand more on what your leadership philosophy is?
Sure. So, what I've found is that, the need for leadership doesn't really change. It's always needed, but leadership strategies change. And, in the beginning, when I became a leader, the workplace was different. The world was different, and so, I learned to lead and be decisive, and make unpopular decisions at times. But then I started to realize that the world was changing. It's becoming more collaborative. I'm getting older. I don't always have the ability to do that project, but I know people who can do that project, and I can maybe facilitate that. And so I started to realize that part of leadership is not just leading, but it's sharing leadership and mentoring leaders. And so a friend of mine that I work with, she's a colleague of mine at UF, she runs collaborating workshops. And in these workshops, what we try to do is identify people's assets, because we all have desires. We all want to do more or other things, or we don't have what we need to really get a satisfying result from what we're doing. And so we work through these collaborative workshops and focusing on assets, bringing people together who have assets that you might need, or you have assets that they need. And as you go through the workshop, you start to recognize what your assets are. You don't really look at yourself that way, but through the workshop, we identify that. And so it helps you as you're taking this path. It's not a path to leadership. I always say it's a path of leadership. Your path is going to be there. How you approach it is really determined by your willingness to engage in leadership. And so you align your strengths, your skills, your knowledge, your abilities, and your desires with those of others to achieve goals. And so you might not always get to share it the way you want. You might not get to be the decision maker. But, it's important to know what you think about things. So leadership has the quality now of assessing the situation. What does it take and how can you contribute in it? And then, being able to know that even though it's not necessarily going the way that you would prefer, you know what you think about it. And that's the most important thing, is to have your own opinion. I was told a long time ago, have your own opinion, don't share it. But if someone asks, it's like a door opening. They've opened the door and you get to walk through. And I do use that approach with my daughters all the time because they're adults now. If they ask, I share. But if they don't, then I, still think what I think, but I keep it to myself. And same thing in leadership. But the other part of it is that if you are not in a position to be the decider, you can be in a position to use it to learn from. So you're always kind of preparing for the next opportunity. So it's really kind of an approach. It's not a journey to a leadership position. It's really leadership all the way along the path.
So I know you have a broad research background, and I wonder what you've gained from your research that's fed into your leadership philosophy.
Well, so my research has helped me in a couple ways. First of all, when I was at FSU, I worked with Dr. Marcia Martis, and she told me one day, you need to remember to build in time to think. Thinking takes time, and you need to plan for that. And so I started to realize that if I didn't give myself time for reflection before I sent that email or made that phone call or sent a text message, you can always do something later, almost always, not always, but almost always. And so in doing research, I realized that I take all this information in and I need time to kind of think about things. And then more recently, in working with the collaborative workshops, the whole concept of appreciative inquiry, which focuses on very positive, open-ended, very personalized questions, can really support, understanding others and yourself, and discovering assets and revealing things about people. And that has really impacted my leadership. It's made me more of a listener rather than someone who has to dominate a meeting.
So when you were an MSI and PhD student, is this where you thought you would be? And kind of what do you see as potential roles for future MSI PhD graduates?
I think you have to really think broadly about how you want to use your education and continue your education. And so, if you're going into librarianship, certainly, it's still a really vibrant field. And when I became a librarian, I always wanted to be a library director. I can't see myself being in an organization where I don't feel like I have an impact. On the days where I struggle at UF, it's because I'm a small fish in a very big pool. And, and sometimes it's really difficult to have an overall organizational impact. But so I just kind of shift and, make sure I'm having a one-on-one impact with people through my work. For others, I think there are opportunities. I think you have to kind of understand yourself, what makes you happy on a day-to-day basis. I used to think in one job that I had that I wanted to have my boss's job. And that's always what I tell people, if you don't want your boss's job, you should think about where you are, because if you don't want that job, what are your other opportunities in that? And if there aren't other opportunities to grow, are you still going to be happy? And so, I think it's important to kind of look at what other people around you are doing and what kind of organization you're joining. So, for library, the library field, I think, there's a huge difference between public and academic libraries. I think skills can transfer. I did it. I worked in public and now I'm in academic, but they're different. So I think that overall, there are a lot of fields, though, that offer opportunities for people who have the kind of skills that we have. We're really good at working with information. We're resourceful. When I was at FSU doing my PhD, we studied students, in information technology. And we were looking at what employers want, and employers really are relying on IT workers to be resourceful. And that's true today. When I'm at work, we get new software, there might be one training and then you're on your own. And so, I go through a lot of different resources to try and improve my skills. So I think there are a lot of opportunities in other fields if librarianship isn't the one that you want to do. Librarianship is still a service field, and it's not for everyone. But fortunately, you have lots of choices.
So, information is still a pretty female-dominated industry. So, what do you think are the challenges for women in the field, and what challenges have you faced specifically?
Well, I've been working for, 40 years. And so those challenges have changed a little bit in a female dominated industry. I think it's important in librarianship, specifically that, that we reflect the communities that we serve, because libraries are resources for their community and they're very identified by the community that they serve. Not every library is the same. In fact, they're almost all different in some ways. And so the challenges for women are to, very much the challenges that men have faced in being, open to changes that technology introduces into the field, and not to fall prey to stereotypes about what our abilities are. I think that still happens. I have two daughters, one's in hospitality management and the other is, a professor at Ohio State, and her specialty is civil engineering. And, I think a long time ago, I was told that I wasn't good at math, and that's not true. But it took me a long time to realize that. And I think that the challenge is to have confidence in yourself. That's still the biggest challenge I find for women, is having confidence in their own abilities and that what they bring to the table is really valuable and sometimes is a better intuitive approach than the ones, that are being trained for people. So I think that in a female dominated industry, we're still not necessarily, the ones in positions of power, and we need to ascend to that and stop being afraid and don't worry about making unpopular decisions. It's going to happen, but that's okay. People move on, or you figure it out and you make changes. And so I think that it's to not be what we were taught to be, but to be ourselves.
Yeah, that's
So,
beautiful.
as a female leader in the information field, how would you empower all women, regardless of gender identity, to thrive in leadership roles? And you kind of touched on some of this with your last answer, but it'd be interesting to know how do you thrive?
Well, I think how you thrive is you spend time with current female leaders. Um, you know, a lot of times jobs, especially jobs you have when you're younger, they can be really important because they teach you what you don't want to do, and that can be really valuable. Um, and when you spend time with current female leaders, leaders just tend to drop advice or information at the most random of times. And so I think that spending time with people, being intentional, calling them up and saying, hey, can I take you out to lunch, or can I just come meet with you and talk? Um, and that's really, empowering. And, also empowering is keeping your skills, sharpening the blade. That's really important, is, keeping your skills up to date, because technology is brutal, and younger generations, I tell my daughters all the time, you guys are going to change jobs multiple times, and skills do transfer, but they don't always transfer in the same way. And so it's, the challenge is going to be for your generations, is to keep your skills up to date and stay fresh and open to new ideas. And it can be really rewarding to recognize when you're not the one who has to be the leader anymore. You're the one who has to mentor the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do that, I recently had someone call me who worked for me 25 years ago in movie theaters, and he told me how much of an impact I had on his career since he left movie theaters. He was probably 17 when I worked with him. And that was really eye-opening to me, that just the day-to-day way that you deal with people was really impactful. So I think just, really seeking those people out. There are a lot of different female leaders in this field, but in others, I think it's just really important to spend time with them and see how they're doing things and what they think.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines, do you have any examples of the way that you've seen women leaders impact librarianship?
Sure, I think you can see a lot of it right now. I think, the people that I think about, some people who are alums of FSU, Amelia Gibson and Aisha Johnson, they are people who've honed their skills. They are educated, they're knowledgeable, and now they have an opportunity to have a voice about the things that impact them. And, the problem of retention of people of color in librarianship, which is a big problem. And they are in the right place to speak to that. They've done the work, and they've developed their voices. And to me, that any opportunity we can provide them to share those voices, is what we should be doing. And so there's some examples of women who've been working at this for a while, and now they have an opportunity to hopefully lead us to a better place.
So I think we're going to start wrapping it up right now. And
Okay.
so, do you have any other thoughts to share about women in leadership?
I think that I think in terms of organizations that you can learn from, FLA is a good example of an organization that provides you the opportunity to network and to work with others and to find mentors. And whether it's that organization or any other kind of discipline specific organization where people are doing what you want to do, it's the best way to know for sure, that is what I want to do, or no, that's not what I want to do. So I think that the more that you can do that, the more confidence you'll have in your choices. And I think that's really what we need, is, to make confidence building an asset that we all have, so that, leadership comes a little bit more naturally and successfully.
Great. Yeah.
So how can people follow your work or get in touch with you?
Well, I don't use Facebook, and Instagram is my daughter's queendom, so I don't go there. But I'm on Twitter at Spears PhD, and I am also on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, and we've had a really good time.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.